Hi, everybody doing? And welcome to Home Based Business Review with Carl Douglas. I will be your host. And today I am very excited about the information we will be sharing with you guys. And I'm sure you will have questions and comments and things like that. We're definitely interested in hearing what your take on what our subject line will be today. And the subject line will be about why is education is so important.
Mm.
And I brought an expert with us today to discuss this subject. Dr. Scott, introduce yourself and say why you feel you're so qualified to talk about this subject line.
Okay, I appreciate that, Carl. Yeah, my name is Scott Finney. I got my PhD from Gonzaga University, and actually, the degree was in leadership studies with an emphasis on the civil rights movement and the history thereof. And I've been teaching African American history and American history with the Afrocentric experience since about 1992 at Eastern Washington University. And then I went on to also teach simultaneously at Spokane Community College, political science as well as American history. And then at Whitworth University, a private university in Spokane, Washington, since about 1996 or so, I've taught the African American experience there as well. And so right now, I'm finalizing my 7-year term as Director of Africana Studies at Eastern Washington University, just outside of Spokane, Washington. And over the last 30 years of being in higher education, I've learned to research, I've learned to find out what critical thinkers who have a lot of research behind them have said about education, have said about the African American experience. And as a result, I've allowed that deposit to kind of build up in me and then engage in articles. I published 12 articles in journals across the country in African American studies and on issues of the African American experience. And of course, my dissertation, which is really my first book, was on the impact of the removal of affirmative action from the University of Washington, and so in Seattle. And so I wanted to quantitatively study what is the issue of race and the consequences that African Americans and also folks along the lower socioeconomic status line, what they experience in the way of disadvantage to get a college degree and thereby get into a professional career that can be very flourishing and very promising. And then 2 years ago, I co-authored a book called Unlocking the Master Narrative. And during that time, in this 6-chapter book, our attempt is to pull away the Eurocentric approach to American history and to bring in the African American experience, the indigenous experience, and the Latinx experience as well. And so, in doing these things and presenting overseas and throughout this country over the last 25 years or so, I've learned and have networked with a lot of folks that have dedicated their lives to this very thing. And so, because of that, as an ever growing student of history and the African American experience, I think I can throw in my 2 cents and have a little something to back it up. Yeah.
Yes. I can see you definitely well qualified to talk about this subject line.
Thank you.
Let's break it down a little bit more. Uh, why is it so important to get an education? What is education?
What is education? Excellent question, Carl. First of all, education is to subject yourself to a training that extracts, I would say, a large body of research. And that large body of research can be in mathematics, it can be in social sciences, it can be in English. But what you're doing is you're learning to, I would say, delve into an exploration of scholastic pursuit, of academic pursuit. And this is I would say, a kind of equipping a person with what's been brought together, compiled through centuries of study. And now here we are at the tip end of wherever we are in our life. We're at the tip end of a mountain of research and scholastic work. And so what you're doing is in education, you're getting yourself familiarized and eventually able to pick out one line that perhaps you could professionally, as a career, be of service to the city you live in, or be of service to the young people, or be of service to a business. What they're looking for are two things. Do they have the credentials that show they have extracted and spent years extracting information and learning to be critical thinkers, not just compiling information, but being able to think as you see a body of information in front of you and reach conclusions that sometimes can be a solution to maybe a medical issue, maybe a solution to a piece of legislation that is denying a group of people the right to vote, wide variety of things. And so it's an exploration, it's a journey into a research kind of mountain. And then secondly, what that does, when you get a degree at any level, whether it's a 2-year degree from a community college or a 4-year degree from a university or a master's degree or a PhD, what you're saying to any potential employer is that you have been trained and you have been kind of a person of resilience to stick in there and to, I would say, not give up, because education can be challenging. But the fact that you have a proven record by that degree or by that certificate, that actually enables employers to invest in you for a lifetime, because you have proven that at your young age, or even at your middle age, whenever you do pursue a higher degree of education, you're actually making a statement. I'm under a development and I can go further in my development, personally, privately, and in the end benefit a company, benefit a society, or benefit a group of people. So it's twofold. You extract a body of research and you learn to reach your own conclusions in the way of being informed, and then learn to express that either by writing or by discussion. And then secondly, you show that you're trainable, that you've been able to stick to something that is putting you under a development and stretching your capacity and potential. In the end, that can be of service either to an employer, to a society, or to a group of people.
Professor, if you don't mind me calling you Professor.
Sure, yeah, you bet.
It's important when you do decide to take this body of education journey, is it important to have a mentor? And if it is, tell me, how do you know if you got a good mentor, and who should you look for as a mentor?
Yes, absolutely. Carl, you hit it right on the head. This is not something you walk through in a way of, I hope I get there, and I hope this little flashlight can clear up my pathway. It is mandatory that you have at least one mentor who has shown a care for you, who has shown an ability to actually read your situations of life and what you're going through, and be there to spur you on, because things will always come in to tell you, well, maybe I should put education aside. Maybe I don't qualify as others. They don't have to study so much. I have to study a whole lot and I barely get by. There are things that are going to challenge you. And the question is, if you could have a mentor that can say, I've been there, I know what you're experiencing, but I made it through, and I'm not a genius. I'm not some special person. I just stuck through it because I had a mentor. And we'll find out that there's a aggregate company of mentors that everyone will have to say, I did not get here by myself. It's true, as the Western proverb of Africa says, it really does take a village to raise a child. And getting into education is really, I would say, a village effort. But it starts with at least one mentor who can help you through those times when you're not so sure of yourself, and can also tell you, look at me, I'm just like you, and I went through it, and it's possible. And in the end, the doors that open up, you can't even dream, by sticking into it with education, what it'll do to bless you yourself, to bless your family, and to bless other people. The sky's the limit. Education opens up a door of endless opportunities, but you do need a mentor, or else you're walking into a very, very dark tunnel and you can't tell what's up or down.
I like that. That was critical information there for anybody who's seeking a better way of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
become not just great, but greater than what they are today.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the history of, we're talking about mentorship,
Yes.
every great person, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, uh, any celebrity you can think of, they all had mentors. I'm talking about very successful celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about a couple. Let's pick a couple of them. Let's randomly pick Martin Luther King. He was
Yes.
mentor.
He really was mentored. He was a person who had a very, very solid home life setting. And his father in Atlanta, Georgia, was a person of perseverance, a person of resilience, and a person very much of purpose and focus. And because of that, he was able to inspire Dr. Martin Luther King to not give up, to seek the way of victory and success in spite of the odds that are against you, which back then was the universal kind of onslaught of segregation. And because of his father's, I would say, faith, because he was a minister, and his father's ability to communicate, to network, and to bring about change, Dr. King saw it role modeled. And because of that, he could take that to a whole nother level. And that's what is the wonderful thing about education. When the baton is passed on to you, you can actually go further than your mentor. You can go further than the person that helped get you there. And then you can look forward to you mentoring someone that could take it further than you've gone. So it's I would say, a chemical reaction that education only affords in this arena of scholastic study. It opens up doors. And Dr. Martin Luther King would tell you, if he was alive today, that if he didn't have his father as a mentor, a role model, a person who went through a lot of ups and downs, but he could see in his father there was a purpose, there was a goal, there was an aim that nothing could shake it and nothing could overturn it. And then we know Dr. King took that to a whole nother level, to the point of giving himself, knowing he was going to be cut short in his life. He said, I have to do what I'm here to do, and I've given myself to this. He said he believed that God has called him to do this. And he also felt that for the sake of the generations behind him, he must do the ultimate sacrifice to give up his life. And of course, he did on April 4th, 1968. And that was a sad day. But at the same time, it was a planting of a seed that is still growing, and I would say even blossoming in certain extents.
Yes, yes. Let's pick another person that was great. And so we can use these examples when someone is saying, who should I pick? How do I do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's pick another name.
Sure. How about the name of Frederick Douglass? This man was, I think, a great example. He was born about 1817 or so. He lived until 1895, African American, who was raised up in slavery. And being in slavery, he was denied all the time any form of education. And of course, for 225 years, from 1640 to 1865 in this country, slavery was an institution that was based on skin color. And it was based on robbing those 4 million people eventually of any degree of education, because the master class that held, of course, these 4 million into this bondage realized that knowledge is power. Knowledge has the ability to break even the bonds of steel that were upon the 4 million slaves. And so what happened with this man named Frederick Douglass, he was able to find a few people that would help him to learn how to read. And he was able, as a slave, to understand some new things, and even things that were going on currently that were embodied in certain items that he read. And that reading changed him from within, and it caused him to long for freedom, not for just freedom's sake, but freedom for the sake of all people, and not even just African American slaves. Here's a man who was raised up in slavery, and as a teenager eventually ran away from slavery, but it was the education that gave him the vision, gave him the sense of purpose, that he became the Dr. Martin Luther King of the 1800s. And in the sense of this, not only to end slavery, but also to grant women and of course African Americans as well, the right to vote. He was very much a person who believed in the equality of all peoples. And because of that, he wrote 3 classic autobiographies that show us it was this little group of white Americans who were against slavery that were willing to pass on the knowledge of literacy to him. And then once he got out and had ran away, he ran up with someone who was into the anti-slavery movement. And he, in a sense, gave, I would say, gave Douglass a kind of a push and a boost that Douglass never imagined, that he would be in the forefront of ending an institution of slavery that the world has never seen before. There's never been a slavery that extracted people from their homeland against their will. There's never been a slavery that was based purely on capital gain. There's never been a slavery that was designated according to genetic skin color alone. There's never been a slavery that denied those under bondage any form of education, any form of family life and marriage, completely, I would say, robbing every sense of dignity. And then at the same time, stripping those people of their homeland culture, of their very name, and of their very language, and even of their faith. So this was I would say, a form of slavery and oppression that is unique in all of humanity. We have never seen this type of slavery with those characteristics I just mentioned. But it was a man in those kind of, I would say, avalanches of oppression upon him that eventually, through education and through finding a number of white Americans who were willing to pass on to him the baton of education in small bits, but he let it build up, it compiled, and eventually William Lloyd Garrison would be the Caucasian civil rights leader of his time. He would pass on to Frederick Douglass this idea: you're educated, you've been a slave, you've come out of slavery, you say things better than I can say it. And William Lloyd Garrison told him, you must be the top voice to end this thing called slavery. And all of a sudden he realized education and mentors, and even this mentor, had opened up such a door to him. And eventually, when he died in 1895, he was considered, like I said, the most influential voice of the 1800s for civil rights. He was the first Black ambassador ever put into employment in this country to Haiti, an all-Black nation. Like I said, he wrote 3 classic autobiographies. And on top of that, this man has given us the greatest insight of what this evil institution was like. And he gave it to us because he experienced it. Then he was able to put it into words, express the feeling, the anguish, the torment, the suffering, and even the hope and the resiliency that the human spirit has encased within us to never go along with in the way of passivity of anything that denies us the right to pursuit of happiness, the right to self-expression, and the right to self-development, which in the end, education does all of those things, which is another reason why it's so crucial.
Beautiful. A lot of you right now would like to rewind this, stop and rewind this. I would say yes, because it's that important. Sit there, if your parents sit there with your children. Dr. Scott, Professor Scott, he is very knowledgeable on the subject line of education. Funnels Connection, he is our educational blogger. So you will get other tapes of him talking about the importance of education, not just education, but how to find the right mentors. That's a step, because if you hang with those who are doing it this way, you're going to be like them.
Yeah.
But if you hang with the right mentor who have the experience and the knowledge, you're in the right class.
Yeah, really.
Okay. So let me pick one other person here, and I know you can break it down for us. Let's talk about let's come to you what a lot of people are aware of right now. Let's talk about the first African American Black president, Barack.
Yes. Well, I would say President Barack Obama was able to take us to a whole nother level that I didn't think was possible in my lifetime. African Americans compose anywhere from 9 to 12% of the population in this country. And with 225 years of slavery still forecasting a shadow of disadvantage. And then on top of that, 345 years of racial segregation. The first Africans came here in 1619, not as slaves, but as indentured servants. And when they were brought here against their will, they experienced an unofficial form of segregation, a kind of an unofficial quarantine based purely on their hair texture, based purely on their skin color and their facial features. So from 1619, the colonial government endorsed such a thing. And then with the independence in 1776, and eventually our Constitution and our first president in 1789, who owned, George Washington, hundreds of slaves, who all, of course, are African, all the way until 1964, which is 345 years of government-endorsed racial segregation based on this one myth that African Americans are inferior to European Americans. Everything was based on that one myth. And because of that, if you think about 345 years of segregation, 225 years of the most inhumane slavery that we've ever seen before, it's an amazing thought that in just 36 years, which would bring us to the year 2000, there would be a development of a African-American male whose father is from Nigeria, whose mother is Caucasian and from the Midwest. And yet by 2008, he would rise up in a political form of stature, of capability, of articulation, of eloquence, and of hope. You know, he gave not only African Americans, he gave all Americans a sense of hope that had been lost since 1968, when Dr. King was killed on April 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee. And then Robert Kennedy, who was somewhat an extension of Dr. King, who had just won the California primary, he was shot down in June 5th of 1968. When those two leaders who stood for equality, who stood for justice, who stood for the poor, who stood for even the anti-war sentiment of those days, and who even stood for the anti-rich. You know, there's nothing wrong with being rich, but if you're getting rich at the expense of the poor, there's a problem. And that's what these two gentlemen also stood for. And then for racial equality, there's never been a pair that we've seen shot down within 2 months of each other that had the potential to turn the entire ship of 225 years of slavery, of 345 years of racial segregation. They had the potential and the capacity to turn the ship. And then they were cut off. And for 40 years, not until 2008, for 40 years, no one of any political weight or stature even talked about racial equality, even talked about racial change, and even racial advancement. And here comes a man so articulate, so I would say educated, coming from a law school and writing for a law journal. He knows the Constitution in his sleep. One of the most qualified individuals for this office. And he is African American. This was a complete turnover of every form of oppression that had come upon African Americans since 1619 up until that time, almost 400 years later. And so we can say with Barack Obama, President Obama, we see an African American person in a setting that has typically denied African Americans a CEO position, typically denied them an ownership of a sports franchise. They can play ball, but they can't own the franchise. That has typically experienced I would say, a short stick or a lack of fairness when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to judicial sentencing. The history's there, the numbers are undeniable. This systemic racism has swallowed up so much potential and capacity of African American people, which should blend with European Americans and with Asian Americans and with indigenous folks and with the Latino Americans into a fabric called the American experiment, the great experiment. We should be one fabric. We should be a quilt of these five. But instead, there's been a kind of a domination and a complete dehumanization. So when he comes along with this stature, with this qualification, it was education that provided for him. And he would tell you clear off the bat, his academic advisors gave him the chance, gave him the belief, and gave him the hope. He always had someone to look to take him through, to point him to the upward direction, even when it seemed like it was impossible. So I was shocked. I think I knew too much history to even believe this could happen, that we could have an African-American male as president in this country in my lifetime. I did not expect it. I was surprised by it. And yet when I went to the inauguration, I was there because I had to see it for myself. I couldn't just watch it on TV. I had to see this. If this is really happening, pinch me if I'm asleep, but I want to be awoke. So I went there, back to Washington, D.C., and I have never seen so many different types of people from all walks of life, all races, all faiths, all backgrounds, all socioeconomic status, and yet they all had the same feeling. It's not this one person we have hope in. It's that this one person could get there is what we have hope in. That the potential of this glass ceiling being broken by an African-American male can point to that African-American young girl who's 6 years old who says, I want to be like Michelle one day. Or can point to a Latino 17-year-old in high school wondering should he stay in school or not, thinking, okay, Barack Obama stayed in school. Eventually, he was his top law student. Eventually, he was able to debate, to write, to articulate, and to, I would say, eloquently define a more perfect union like we've never heard a president do, to quote the preface of the U.S. Constitution like he did. I would say he was the embodiment of hope, potential, capacity, in spite of the odds that were against him. And so when I was there, it was something. It was over 2 million people. I've never seen that many human beings squeezed into one place in that part of January of Washington, D.C. But I had to see it for myself. And I would say that was a day of attainment, of pride, of hope, and of expectation fulfilled right before our eyes. It was an amazing thing. And so, he didn't change the whole system now that everything's all open and fair and we're in a post-racial situation. No, not at all. But what he did was he cracked that ceiling and he showed the potential of what young people could do of all backgrounds who could actually give in the way of donations higher than any of the opposing parties' donations, which has been purely from millionaires. He showed what from the ground up, this grassroots effort could actually change the political voice, at least for 8 years. Like we've never seen it before. And he really didn't even have to say anything. What he was said something. When he came out and said something, that just added onto it. That just made it double the impact and double the power. And I remember my parents who saw that. They have passed away since then, but both of them, with tears in their eyes, said this day has finally come to this degree. And so when it comes to Barack Obama and those advisors that kept him in his undergrad experience, that kept him with his law school experience, to never give up, to keep going on. I tell you, it was those type of silent, faceless mentors that produced Barack Obama, President Obama, that you and I can say, well, he made it, he did it, it's possible. So why not let education furnish us, equip us with that potential, even with that expectation, to whatever degree you see, whether it's to help the inner city kids in Chicago, whether it's to help the migrant workers down in Los Angeles, whatever it may be, we can do it. But education is the foundation, it's the footing to make any change possible in this country.
Thank you very much. Professor Scott, I'll tell you, I wish I can get on this subject a little bit longer, but we will have a part 2 to this because it's something that needs to be understood, not for disappearance, but for the parents who have children.
Yes.
That they can, I always say your children are looking at the parents.
Yep.
to find or help with finding the right mentor, or even discuss that decision. It's a family decision.
Mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm,
I do truly believe, like my family,
mm-hmm,
we have meetings. We
mm-hmm.
talk about how we're going to move forward and with direction. Okay,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
so yes, we're going to definitely have to discuss this again.
Sure.
Okay,
You
but
bet.
we, like always, we love to hear what you have to say. And for those of you, you want to go to funnelsconnection.com, and you will see, if you click at the bottom here, you will see where you can get more information about Dr. Professor Scott here. And if you'd like to call him, contact him, his right on the side here, there's a place that you can go ahead and get in touch with him right away if you like. I'm sure he'll get back to you within 48 hours. He is busy, as you probably suspect at this time. But once again, thank you for your wisdom and your kindness and your understanding
I appreciate it.
of history.
And Carl,
Okay.
thank you for the opportunity and giving me a forum for such.
Uh,
You're a gift. You are a gift. Thank you. And a blessing.
I appreciate that. But bye for now.
Bye-bye.